Greetings. Welcome to the Urban Fantasy Track discussion of Supernatural episode Inherit the Earth, number 19 and almost the end. And I'd like to offer apologies for our late start. If anybody was waiting around with bated breath and we were a little bit late getting started, we do apologize. We had some technical issues from a couple of us, and that got us going late. But we are going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to have my wonderful panelists introduce themselves, and then we'll get going with questions. So thanks very much. And Rachel, we'll begin with you.
Thanks. My name is Rachel Graves. I'm an urban fantasy author. I have 5 books out and 1 coming next month. And I've been a fan of Supernatural since the beginning. I have the t-shirt, the purse, the wallet. I had the tattoo briefly. It's a long, sad story. And I'm really sad to see it come to an end.
As are we all. And yet, Beth.
My name is Beth Dolgner. I write paranormal fiction and nonfiction. This is the end of a 15-year journey for me that we're coming to, and I really want to know more about Rachel's disappearing supernatural tattoo. So maybe we'll have time for that later.
Really, and even the purse. I'm kind of interested in the purse. Gail.
Hi, I'm Gail C. Martin. I write epic fantasy, urban fantasy, near future, post-apocalyptic, and more. I fell in love with Supernatural when it was in season 11 and went so far down the rabbit hole I haven't seen daylight since. And so I may have come in late to the party, but I'm an enthusiastic party goer, and I run the Supernatural TFWNC group, and I'm a guest blogger on Winchester Family Business and had a chapter in There'll Be Peace When You Are Done. So yeah, rabbit hole.
It's worked out fine for you, though. Yes. Keith.
Hi, I'm Keith R.A. DeCandido. I've written a ridiculous amount of fiction, some of it in worlds of my own creation, and also a great deal of it in worlds of other people's creation, including things like Star Trek and Farscape and Orphan Black and Sleepy Hollow, Alien, and, well, Supernatural. I wrote 3 of the first 4 Supernatural novels that were published, including Nevermore, Bone Key, and Heart of the Dragon. I also wrote the introduction to the Ben Bella books collection In the Hunt, which was a collection of essays about Supernatural. And Inside Editions put out a little book called John Winchester's Journal, which is mostly a blank journal, but there's some bits of John's journal at the very beginning, and I wrote the text for that as well. And I also, like the show a little.
Just a little.
Okay, I have to interrupt because as a Key West native, Bone Key was amazing, and I am grateful for everything you did for my island in it. Okay, keep going. It was so well researched.
There you go. That's always a nice thing. That's something an author likes to hear, right?
Oh yeah, and I've actually written quite a lot of fiction in Key West, but we'll talk some other time.
Okay, and Kristen.
Hi, I'm Kristen Jackson, graphic designer, freelance artist. I've been a fan since the very beginning. So being able to see this long epic journey of the Winchesters through to the very end has just kind of been an emotional experience, and I'm really happy to be able to talk about everybody and help process all this the ending episodes and just share my love of the show with the fans.
Well, we're very grateful you're here. Okay, are you guys hearing it? Am I echoing? Dang it.
You're good now.
Okay. Oh, okay. All right. Now, the first thing I want to discuss is about Sam in the beginning of the episode. After Dean shows back up solo, and Sam says to both Dean and Jack, he says, "We tried to rewrite him, and the whole world paid the price. There's no one left to save." And to me, when I heard that, I kind of thought to myself, well, for Sam, that seems to be the whole purpose of the mission, kind of saving other people. Whereas for Dean, it always seems as though it's more personal. And we talked about this briefly last week about what was going to happen when everybody was gone. How was that going to affect how they looked at what their mission was? So my question is for you guys is, do you agree with me on that, on the fact that it seems as though that was kind of Sam's whole, that to him, that was the purpose of the mission, was protecting everyone. And that for Dean, it's always been something more personal, mostly to protect Sam. But, a small, but also growing group of people that he considers his, family and friends. And I'm just curious what you guys think. And Rachel, we'll begin with you.
Okay. I go back to the show's tagline from the early days where it was saving people, hunting things. And I really think what we see there is the dichotomy between the brothers. I think Dean is hunting things and Sam is saving people. And I think for Dean, he really needs to go out and get that kill and get rid of the bad guy. And he can't do that anymore, but it's not as hard like Sam, saving people is who he is. I mean, we see that even when he wasn't hunting, he wanted to be a lawyer. He wanted to help people. That's part of what motivates him. And I think what's hard for him in this show is he would have had to hurt someone and he didn't make that choice. And now he's got no one left to save. And I just think he's so lost in the beginning of this episode. He is in a place where we usually see Dean, that hard drinking, I don't know what comes next kind of mess. It was rough.
Yeah. Beth.
Yeah, my heart really went out to Sam because he does always want to save people. He wants to help people. And you can tell that in that moment, he's completely blaming himself for the fact that all of a sudden there's nobody left to save. They're all gone. And I actually expected for us to see him dealing with it much worse than he did. I feel like we kind of skipped over that part a bit in the episode. But I imagine that kind of guilt would be something that would have really weighed on Sam if the situation had lasted for an extended amount of time, like Chuck wanted it to.
Right. Gail.
I think it goes back and forth between the brothers because we've seen Dean be utterly devastated when a hunt didn't go right and they weren't able to save everybody. Or maybe they were able to gank the monster, but they didn't save the people. And so we've seen Dean really beat himself up for that and feel that he failed, even if they did the best they could. And we've seen Sam get kind of fixated on, Sam really didn't care about saving the world when he released the darkness or when he released Lilith, or when Sam is out for revenge, the whole world can burn. So I think
True.
it's back and forth between the brothers, and mostly they save each other.
Right. Okay. Keith.
It's hard for me to answer this because Rachel pretty much did my entire answer.
Same wavelength. It's something about the keys.
Yeah, probably. But yeah, there's two lines from the pilot that really are the touchstone for the entire series. One is at right after Mary is killed, when John gives his instruction to 6-year-old Dean to take 6-month-old Sammy, or however old they are, out of the house. Take your brother and run as fast as you can. Now, Dean, go. That's Dean's entire life.
Right. Yeah.
And then also, as Rachel said, saving people, hunting things. That's what they do. And what I saw that line being was a riff on that. It was, there's nobody left to save. And by implication, there's nothing left to hunt either, because there's nothing. There's a lot of that is just the sheer existential craziness of being the last 3 people on Earth. And yeah, I thought it was entertaining that the first episode they filmed after the pandemic was one in which there was basically no other people around.
Right.
This is the episode, but it's also, I mean, that's just and they did a really nice job. And I forget who directed the episode, but it was whoever it was did an excellent job of showing how empty everything was. This was just nothing. Just the empty playground, the restaurant with the half-eaten food, the beer tap that was still going. Although honestly, it should have run out of beer long before they got there. But we'll let that go.
Right,
Um,
right.
uh, and my wife read somewhere that was actually Jensen Ackles' family business brew.
Yeah.
Family
And,
tap.
and it was Sammy's Diner for that matter. But
Right.
but just the sheer nothingness of everything. And a lot of that was just your basic existential horror that isn't particular to Sam, but would be how anybody would react if suddenly confronted with the idea that you and your brother and your surrogate kid are the only people left on Earth.
Right. It was, is it John Showalter that was the directed that episode? So,
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, because I wrote that down. But okay, and Kristen.
Yeah, I agree with what everybody else was saying. And Sam is just he's a very people person. So to remove all the people from the planet and to be left by himself, even though Dean is, defined himself a lot around the hunt and the monsters for his whole life, Sam is kind of all about the emotions and the people, and to just be left with emptiness was probably especially devastating for him. Because he had always kind of had a little bit more of that idea of, maybe at one point we can put this aside and go on and have other lives. But now they don't have anybody. They're all that's left. And I think that kind of hurt him where he has a very vulnerable spot and hurts him most. Dean could probably continue on doing something. He'd build something, right. He'd fix the car, he'd still have something. But Sam, he's a nurturer sort of person for a group and for others, and to be without anybody. I was kind of wondering though why he didn't take to the dog as much as Dean took to the dog. That was kind of like Sam should have been like, oh my gosh, it's a dog, and been running over and giving the dog a hug. But so I think he was kind of especially in shock because of the loss and feeling the loss of an entire planet and feeling like that was his fault, that there was no one left, and watching all the people disappear around him and being helpless to stop it was probably just like the deepest cut that he could have as a person.
Right, because he was their protector.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I couldn't help. Oops, we're echoing.
Go ahead, Gail. Yeah.
I couldn't help but hear Obi-Wan's voice in my head that it was like a billion people cried out and were suddenly silenced.
Well, and I want to point out, we have Melissa in the comments talking about how Dean wants to save Sam and Sam wants to save the world. And I think one of the things that was really hard about this is that they couldn't help each other. They've lost everyone else in the world and they don't really have the strength to help each other. Nobody seems to know what's going on next here. It was a really, can I say it was a real downer? The end of the world was so depressing.
Right. Well, at that point, at this beginning point of that episode, yes, I think that that's true, and the fact that they weren't even together when it happened was also kind of an interesting point, because they've both had things that they've had to take care of on their own, but for something, something that dire, they would normally be together at the time, and they just weren't at that time. And anyway, what is something else I would like to talk about is when we get to the point, and I loved the way they did the whole tricking of Michael thing. That worked out nicely, and trapping Chuck. But that it was kind of hard to see them getting beaten up and stuff. But that's them. That's what they keep doing. They do keep fighting, right? So, but what was really striking, I think, about what Sam said to Chuck was that you're just forgotten. which, as we know from anything that you read in terms of, even if it's mythological um, kinds of things or any other religious literature, that's like the worst thing for God, because they have to have belief in order to keep going. And Jack tells Chuck later, at the end of that, or no, I guess this was later in the episode when Jack is telling Sam and Dean that Chuck put himself into the story and that was his mistake, that he shouldn't have done that. And so that all kind of points to the things that we know Chuck was guilty of, like narcissism and self-obsession and, just the power that, not just the power that he had, but the power that he relished. It was his attitudes towards it, all those things that most religion tells us that we're supposed to avoid. He was guilty of. And I just, what I want to get kind of your reactions to, any of those points that I'm bringing up, whether you, if you agree with me, if you think that there's more to it than that. I mean, I know there was a lot more going on in that particular scene, but that was to me, that was one of the more important things that Sam said to him was, "You're just forgotten." And what kind of a difference is that going to make, in terms of how Jack does things? But we'll get to Jack a little bit later. But Beth, we'll start with you this time.
I absolutely loved what they did to Chuck. And I think it's the most fitting punishment they could have possibly given him, because like you said, he has been so selfish and so self-centered, and it's all about the power and his own entertainment and his own interest. And now he's just another face in the crowd, just another human having to go out and live his life. And I think for him, that is probably far, far worse than if they had killed him. And it's interesting that he wanted to punish Sam and Dean by letting them live there on Earth with nobody else, to kind of spend the rest of their lives thinking about what had happened and what they'd done and how their choices had led them to this. And now the same thing is happening to Chuck. He has to live out the rest of his life on Earth thinking about all of the things he had done to lead him to that. And so I think that's just the ultimate justice for him. And I think that seeing Jack take the opposite approach is really nice. And I thought it was interesting how he talked about how he would be in the rain, he would be in the sand, he would be in the water, because that kind of throws back to when we saw him with Adam. And Adam said, "Well, I want you to pick the rock that God has touched." And Jack said, "Well, he's in all of them. He's in everything." And so I thought that was a nice tie-in to what he had said, that he already kind of had that understanding that divinity is in everything and not quite so literally hands-on as Chuck had been.
Right, because he even said, "I won't be hands-on," which was an interesting way to describe it. Because I actually had to back it up when he said that, just because I thought, okay, I want to make sure I heard him correctly, because it seemed like, sometimes the way Jack speaks, it's kind of a throwback to older language, which I guess is his whole Nephilim status, that the way the angels sometimes would speak in kind of stilted language on the show. And Kaz being a great example. So I thought, okay, I'm gonna double check to make sure that's what he said. And he's okay. Anyway, okay. Gail.
Yeah, I think that for Chuck, being written out of the story is the ultimate punishment, because he needs to be important. He needs to be center stage. He wants to be the impresario running the show, the center of the three-ring circus, and he's nobody, So I also thought that making him mortal went a little bit towards solving the issue of death reaping God, because if the former God is now mortal like everybody else, then at some point he will die, assuming people can die, since nobody's been made the new death. I'm not sure how that's going to work.
Right.
Theoretically, death still reaps the former God. And Jack's language reminded me a lot of when he went to that garden with the snake after he ate the golden snitch kind of thing, and had that kind of transcendental moment when he got his soul back. And even further back when the boys met Joshua in the garden, there was that sense of peace and God is in everything and we're all part of the same cosmic star stuff. And so I thought that for the triumph of Team Free Will, it was a pretty great conversation, because free will won.
Yeah. Okay, Keith.
What I liked about that whole thing was that I said this the last time I was on here, that they've never lost sight of the fact that Chuck was originally introduced to us as a writer, and specifically as a guy who wrote supernatural novels, which freaked me the hell out when he first appeared. I'd already written.
Now, if his name had been Keith, that would have been the end of it right there. You would have been beside yourself.
That,
right.
That would have freaked me out even more. But they even in the end, that's how they keep describing him as the writer of the world. And one of the worst things, one of the most self-indulgent and dangerous things a writer can do is insert themselves into the story, and make them the story. That's been I've seen that, and we've all seen that with writers who particularly once they've been writing for a long time and as they get older will sometimes just start doing that, just putting themselves into their own fiction, which doesn't always work, and is kind of self-indulgent and often makes for lousy fiction. And sometimes apparently can destroy the entire world. But and also the way Melissa in the comments was mentioning that gods fade away when they're forgotten. That's also true of writers. There are writers who are when people stop reading them, they are forgotten, and what they in essence did was have Jack take that away from him, take his muse away from him for all intents and purposes, and take it upon himself. So I like the way that in the end they kept that theme going from the very beginning of when we first met Carver Edlund, and all the way through, whether we're calling him Carver Edlund or Chuck or God or whatever, it's still the journey of a writer in many ways.
Okay, Kristen.
Okay. Let's see, for Chuck. I really did like his particular ending, and for me it was like almost an anti-redemption tour, where all these other characters over the years, even some of the villains have had redemption arcs, and they left better than they started when first encountering the Winchesters. Whereas God seems to have had an anti-arc where he ended up worse than when they first met him. So for them to finally, take him down and bring him down, whereas all these other characters, they seem to be risen up or given a reason to be better versions of themselves. That kind of stood out to me. That God he was the one guy who seemed to fare a lot worse. Although Lucifer and Michael, they kind of just also Lucifer and Michael, we finally got the brother versus brother that had been hanging out there since season 5. So they finally did have their battle, and they both killed each, ended up one alive, one dead, and then they both died. So at least we had that resolution as to which one would kill the other. But anyway, God just it was a fitting end, and like everybody's been saying, the kind of the ultimate end for the worst possible fate for a god is to go away and be forgotten, and no one would ever remember him. He would be just written out of the story. So that would be curious if there ever was a supernatural movie, if he would come back and they would kind of do a little catch up on what actual God has been up to. Did he actually try to go back to his old job of being a writer?
Oh yeah.
Did he have any omniscient powers left after Jack kind of stripped everything away from him? It'd be curious to find out what his next, if he had any lessons learned, like so many other people had lessons learned in their stories.
Okay, thank you. Rachel.
So one of the things that was very hard for me about this episode was that there was an episode called The Real Ghostbusters. That was my absolute favorite. They go to a supernatural convention and Chuck's there, and it was just a great, fun episode that I loved. And Chuck is so horrible in the most recent episode, and his character arc has gone from like kind of a lovable loser to just being the worst being ever. And there's a German word called Schadenfreude that I'm probably pronouncing wrong, but I wanted him to suffer. And I was a little annoyed that they took him so badly. Like he really beat the tar out of Sam and Dean for no good reason, and he was a despicable being. But there was a line Michael said when they were in the church where he talked about it being, he did a lot of promo basically for God, that he tried to talk God up. And I didn't pay enough attention to hear the line word for word, but it made me wonder if in this universe, God has always been kind of evil. That God has never really been the good person that we thought. So that was all like Michael talking him up. And for me, that level of depth is something that makes me want to watch an episode that's otherwise a little painful to watch again. If they do a movie or bring back Chuck, I just want to hear that he was like really, really miserable every day for a long time.
Yeah, that I know. The comment that you're talking about in this episode was Michael saying that he had make sure he came and kind of burnished is the word he used, his father's image so that he would stay, alive and in people's minds in this particular manner. So you may have a point that he may have been going down that path for a lot longer than even it seemed like, to us. Now we do, as Keith pointed out, and Melissa had a comment here about the elder gods that fade away when they're forgotten. And and that is something that we hear anytime you see gods plural showing up, I think, in different kinds of fantasy. But then reminder here about the most recently with the luck story arc, and that
Fortuna, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah.
So then that was cool. Now, my next question, and this is appropriately going to be Gail's to take first, is that one of the things that she had brought up to me the following day, following the episode, which I was glad that I'd already seen it when I read her message, because it had a whole bunch of good stuff in it. She pointed out that in many ways Chuck did end up getting the ending to that story, not necessarily his story, which we were just talking about a moment ago, but the with the characters, even though they didn't quite play out the way he wanted it to, or that he was expecting. If he wanted a Cain and Abel story with Sam and Dean, that's not what he got. He got the Cain and Abel story with Lucifer and Michael, and then this with between he and Michael, a reflection of Abraham and Isaac. So, and I'm glad you pointed that out, Gail, because I probably would have gone. I might have thought of it like 5 years from now or something. I'm just kidding, but anyway. But I was glad you pointed it out because that one did not readily come to mind at the time, and so that was a great observation. And so he got his way, but not the way he wanted to. And my question was around all that. I mean, what else? If there's something else that you would like to add to that observation, And also, just in general, although a number of you already addressed this, is that were you actually satisfied with the ending that Chuck got? Do you feel and not just Chuck, but Lucifer and Michael, and that those folks, I guess you say, the divine family. What did you find it satisfying? And Gail, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I loved the episode, and I was so happy to see the boys. That scene of them sitting on the table in the bunker with the beer, and then Dean brings Sam in for a hug, and they go on a road trip, and I mean, I just loved that. So I was very, very happy. And if Thursday's final episode sucks, then last week's will forever, in my mind, be the last episode,
the finale,
series, and I can live with that. I thought it was interesting that Sam and Dean offered to Chuck, okay, we'll kill each other. I'll kill him. He'll kill me. And Chuck at that point said, no, that would be boring because I'm not wresting it from you. You're offering it, so it's not fun anymore.
Right.
Kind of is taking the wind out of the bully's sails. Well, gee, if I don't have to make you hurt for it and you're going to give it to me, it's not fun anymore. Yeah, I was happy with what happened to Chuck because I loved that Dean said, that's not who I am. That's not who we are.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to let you live and deal with it. And that was very fitting for who the boys have become, where they didn't need to take that blood vengeance. They could see that there was another kind of vengeance that was probably worse. And to someone like Chuck, to a narcissist like that, being ignored and useless and irrelevant is more painful than dying, because if he died, he could still maybe be a martyr and maybe people would rally to his memory. But just being irrelevant and boring and pointless, there's no reason for him to ever be on stage again. And that's gotta really, hurt worse than dying. So,
right.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Now, and what you were saying about irrelevant, none of us likes that. Nobody wants to feel as though they have no purpose or no use, but especially someone like him. Yeah, that had to sting. Keith.
I had two problems with the episode. Overall, I thought it was great. The overall thing, and them tricking Chuck and tricking Michael, for that matter, was great. I had two issues with the execution. One was, how the hell did they keep? Well, first of all, it was just dumb luck that Lucifer happened to drop the book and it was still open.
Closed when he dropped it.
Because if it had closed when he dropped it,
and it also how
they avoid
Michael seeing it, because the whole
planet depended on it. The other problem, Kristen, can you
I just
and she's still not muted. But okay, there we go. The other problem was, which I actually only just thought of when Gail was talking, which was, what if they had said, "Fine, I'll kill him, he'll kill me," and Chuck had said, "Okay, go ahead." The whole plan goes out the window at that point.
Right.
I'm always leery of that type. I mean, it was a good plan, but it was one that depended on circumstances outside their control that could have really screwed it up. Having said that, they also had nothing to lose at that point. But I loved the whole setup. I love the fact that they knew Michael well enough to know that he would come scurrying back to Daddy, because of course he would. I have to admit, I'm sure it was great for Rob Benedict to be able to basically beat the crap out of Jensen Ackles and Jared Padalecki for 5 minutes. From a sheer, meta point of view there. And of course, the boys are always getting beat up. They've gotten the crap kicked out of them constantly over the last 15 years. So it seems only fitting that in their big final battle, they really get the crap kicked out of them one last time. So overall, I thought it was great. It just, like I said, bits of the execution were not perfect, but overall, it was a good ending. And especially, I like the fact that it showed that the brothers were smart. You know, it wasn't
Right.
just them overpowering, because it's freaking omnipotence. You know, you're not going to overpower it anyway. But it also showed that these are not stupid people. This is one of the reasons why they've survived. It's not just because they're strong, but because they're smart.
Yeah, and what
I
you were
absolutely loved that Sam goes and helps Dean stand up, and they're practically leaning on each other with all these broken
Mhm.
limbs.
Yeah.
That's so Sam and Dean.
Mhm.
Yeah, it really was. It was a good visual to have to kind of reinforce what the show's always been, has always been like, I think. And Kristen, I don't know, could you hear any of the question before you? Okay, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and let Rachel and Beth answer, and then I'll bring it up again if that's okay with you. Okay, Rachel.
I felt there was a lot of meta stuff going on in this episode that I would love to have talked to the writers more about. There was a line in the episode before this one about breaking toys, and it kind of felt to me like that's what the writers were doing, that they were deliberately breaking the characters I loved so that I couldn't have future supernatural movies. For a show that's had problems with sexism in the past, for them to be literally like not a spoken word by a woman. I mean, like, we had Beth Death talk for like 5 seconds before we killed her. I just, with the build up to Amara and this whole idea that Amara was going to be significant somehow, and Chuck sort of sucked her in, and then she didn't show up. I wanted so much better for the boys. And after 15 years, I would have loved to see, because what Keith says is true. There were a lot of coincidences that needed to come true here. There were a lot of things that God is all knowing, but he wouldn't know that. But I can forgive a lot, because you got to give me the scene of Dean saying, "Your daddy's boy," which is like, Dean, really? Can you say that? The
Right,
ultimate
right.
daddy's boy is calling someone out for being a daddy's boy. All right, I give up. You're allowed to kill God. Go for it. So
Okay, and Beth.
Well, first of all, I was absolutely delighted to see Lucifer show up.
Yeah.
I love that character. I just think he's always a delight to watch. And I especially loved the fact that he tells Michael, like, "Oh yeah, our father came to me
Right.
to come and help him out, not to you." And I after everything that Michael had done, I think that just really shows that Chuck only thinks about himself. He doesn't care who's been loyal to him. He doesn't care who has helped him. He does what's going to be best for him and what's going to be the most exciting story arc, I guess you could say. So I thought that was really a nice twist there to see that just reiterates that Chuck is a jerk. I would use stronger language, but we're we're live online. And then I just thought that Michael being killed by truly by his own father was really, again, just drove home what a hot mess that God and the angels are, that they literally just destroyed each other. I mean, they didn't even need Sam and Dean to intervene on that one. So yeah, I thought it was a pretty fitting end for all three of those characters, that they essentially just took each other out in the end.
Yeah, and you talking about Lucifer, I know that was a nice surprise, to have him show up, and I did get a kick out of him calling Michael the Almost Mighty. That was pretty interesting. But Kristen, what the question was that that Chuck did in a way get the ending he wanted, a Cain and Abel story, but not the one that he really that he was expecting it, or he wanted it to be Sam and Dean, but really it was between Michael and Lucifer, and then with him killing Michael himself, that's a kind of a throwback to Abraham and Isaac, the observation of which is thanks to Gail. But what my question was is that, were you satisfied with the way that Chuck, that the ending that Chuck himself got, and with what happened with, you know, Lucifer and Michael, and just that, I guess, that unholy trinity of those characters right there.
For me, yes, for God's ending. Yes, for Michael's ending. I'm going to seriously miss Lucifer because he was like one of my favorite characters. He was just so snarky, absolutely wonderful. He just walks into a room, and if anybody else chose to notice, I don't know, but he didn't have the angel wings in his, you know, when he was killed. We didn't get to see the wings, so who knows? Maybe he comes back later. But I mean, if they all go to the empty, and you know, I guess you could just kind of pull them back out of there if you need them. But yeah, I didn't feel anything really for Michael. You know, I'm sorry for anybody who's a Michael fan, but I didn't have the emotional reaction to his demise as much as I did that. You know, I was like, oh geez, Lucifer, you're dead again. So, but you know, they keep coming back. You know, one thing about the Winchesters, they keep coming back, and some of the people around him keep coming back. So I will always have hope that Lucifer will return in some form.
There you go. There you go. Now, the other thing that maybe we'll find out the answer to this coming up in the actual finale. And that is that we don't know what this new world looks like. And this was another point that Gail made to me, was that Kaz made a prophecy, or not, not like standing on a mountaintop kind of prophecy, but where he said that the Jack could be the one to bring peace on Earth. Well, turns out that, Jack's been, down a hard road, but he ultimately things are in his hands now, for better or worse, for a while. But we don't really know anything about how things are going to look. Who's left, who do we get back, and who do we not get back? Do the people who disappeared from the other world, do they come back because they were in our world where they were sent away? Then somebody like Eileen, who was dead and then got brought back, is she going to stay dead, or is she going to come back? And there really wasn't time to really cover that in this episode. But I did also want to make the observation that it kind of struck me, was that now we know, but he was able to be upset on his own before he got to Jack and Sam. But it seemed to me as though when Dean was explaining about Kaz, or what little he did say, that it was I guess it was just Dean trying to take trying to be stalwart and everything, but he didn't seem quite as devastated by it, I guess, as we would have thought, even though we saw that at the end of the episode when Kaz was actually taken into the empty. And Gail had the comment about Sam didn't ask right away, well, are you going to bring back Eileen? They didn't ask Jack, but they didn't really get much of a chance to do that. So really what I'm curious about from you guys is, what's your reaction in terms of, what do you think we're going to see in this new world? And do you feel as though Jack is going to do a much better job of it than Chuck? Well, anybody's going to be better than Chuck, right? I mean, any of us could do better than Chuck, let's face it. And the four of you on the panel are writers, so I mean, there you go. But anyway, let's talk about that. What will the new world look like? And we'll start with Keith.
It's hard to say. I honestly think that and this jumps back to the previous question briefly, I think some of what they originally intended for this was short-circuited by the apocalypse that we're all living through right now. Um, like, I mean, it's obvious they were setting something up with Amara that probably was short circuited by them trying to limit the number of actors they were able to use. Um, I at least I hope that's the case, because I mean that was really, that was a gun they put on the mantelpiece that really needed to be fired. But there was a lot of other stuff that probably, you know, should have happened, but they were limited by the pandemic. Having said that, one of my absolute favorite final episodes of a TV show was Hercules: The Legendary Journeys, which ended with Hercules and Aeolus walking down a pathway, going off to their next adventure. For that matter, Star Trek: The Next Generation ended that way, with Picard joining the poker game, but then the Enterprise went off to its next adventure. There's something very satisfying about knowing that our heroes will continue on even after we stop paying attention to their adventures. And I really hope that what Jack did was basically do a soft reset of the world, but it's basically more or less back to the way it was, which also means that there are still going to be things that go bump in the night, and there are still going to be monsters, and they will still need to be hunted. And these two guys will still be driving around in their cool car, shooting them in the head. And that would, on the one hand, I would like to see them have a normal life. On the other hand, I can't imagine them having the first freaking clue what to do with one. And I would love to see them just basically going back out on the road and continuing doing what they do best, in some form or other. I also really hope that basically everybody's alive again, because I'm tired of people dying on the show that I like.
That's true. You get attached to somebody. It's like, don't get too attached. Yeah.
I'm still bitter about Ellen and Joe. I'm still bitter about. No, I'm incredibly bitter about Special Agent Victor Henriksen, who is the single best character in the entire show. Who is basically, I mean, Henriksen is basically what Dean would have been if he had become an FBI agent instead of a hunter. And I loved that character, and he should have been around forever, and they freaking killed him. You know, and Rufus and Bobby and Charlie and so many other great characters that were just
Benny.
Yes. And I kind of hope Jack brings all of them back just for the hell of it, but I don't see that happening.
Well, maybe we'll find out some of it next week. We'll see. Kristen.
I know that this was not the last episode, but I've been feeling that it was the last episode of the Winchester story, whereas next week is going to be the end of the series. So for the story ending and maybe what's going forward, I kind of thought it would be like a return to the first 5 seasons, or the first 3 seasons, you know, before the Angels, before Heaven War, before, you know, all of that, like a reset, and they will go back to the regular monsters, you know, the regularly scheduled monsters of vampires and werewolves and whatnot. And so they wouldn't be a part of this grander apocalypse kind of storyline for a future supernatural for them. And I was, you know, for me, hanging questions would be what happened to heaven since it was powered down, and all those souls, you know, what happens if they run out of energy? Is Jack going to go kind of repower everybody or get the batteries going by making more angels? What was happening to hell and Rowena during this, you know, God erasing everything? Did they get erased too? If they weren't part of that sort of the mortal world, were they just kind of sitting there watching on the sidelines? Were the people in heaven, you know, whatever remains the angels, sitting there watching on the sidelines? Because we know the Reapers continued on. So what happened to those other parts of the show? Are they going to be all, you know, following Jack's lead and now kind of take more of a hands-off approach to things? And we never really got an answer of what happened to Jesse, because he was kind of hanging out there. I thought that was a a character that really could have helped out in the final ultimate battle. You get the Antichrist combined with the Nephilim, that maybe they wouldn't have needed extraordinary measures to take God down with bringing Michael back and whatnot. So I still see that there's unanswered, many unanswered questions out there, but just for Sam and Dean's regular lives, I could see them going back to a more season 1 through 3 type of life, driving around, hunting monsters, doing credit card scams, playing cards, and and saving those big metaphysical types of battles that they're just not going to be a part of that type of scene anymore. So that was it.
Okay. And Rachel.
Perhaps I'm dreaming too large, but I would love to see all of those characters that we've learned to love along the way, Jody and Eileen and Donna and all of those folks come together in some sort of a family style seasons 1 to 5, because I really think Sam and Dean, this is a story about found family, and I would love to have them continue hunting with their found family around them. And one of the most difficult parts for me about this finale was that it stripped away all of the family Sam and Dean had carefully built for themselves. I really think the boys deserve family. Dean at one point had a kid, he worked construction, Sam had a girl. Like, they've been searching for that their whole lives, and it would be so nice to me if we could end on that idea of them. Maybe that is surrounded by a family of hunters, I don't know, but just with someone, not just the two of them alone.
Okay. Beth.
This episode just really felt like the end, especially with that little montage at the end.
Right,
so I'm
yeah.
really curious what they're going to do next week, because I'm satisfied with what we got this week. I think it was, to me, it was a good place to end. And my initial thought, with everybody coming back, Jack kind of snapping everybody back into existence, was, well, maybe Jack didn't bring back any of the monsters. Maybe the vampires, werewolves, all of those monsters just don't come back. So nobody has to worry about hunting things anymore. And then I realized that if that happened, that means Garth is not there anymore. And I was
Right.
like, I can't deal with that. So I think that's probably not the most likely scenario. And quite frankly, next week, I'm kind of similar to Rachel, except if they just had everybody sitting around a table having Thanksgiving dinner, Sam and Dean and Jody, Donna, Bobby, Charlie, I would be perfectly satisfied just to watch them for 45 minutes sitting around talking and passing stuffing and gravy back and forth. So I'm satisfied with what we got this week, and I'm, like I said, anything else is just icing on the cake for me.
Okay. Gail.
Well, to Beth's point about Thanksgiving, this was the first post-COVID episode shot.
Right.
And I love how many scenes everybody's carefully standing 6 feet away from each other.
Yeah, I did notice that too. Yeah.
And Sam and Dean's hug at the end. But, they're in the war room and they're all on all quarters of the table. Everybody was so distant. So that was kind of funny when you started looking for it. There's an old AU curtain fic, and curtain fic in fan fiction is how the show might end. This was 3 years ago. Basically, Chuck rewards the boys for their good work about something by sealing up heaven and hell, taking away all the monsters, and letting them have peace because they're done. And I'm watching this going, well, son of a bitch, they might actually get that. This might actually work out. So that struck me as funny, because Jack was supposed to bring this peace on Earth. Well, if heaven and hell can't meet anymore, there are no crossroad demons, there are no angels with an agenda, there are no monsters, then it's up to free will whether you get heaven, whether you get peace on Earth. And that's a little scary given humanity's track record, but at least it rules out outside interference, which could be okay. The other thing that struck me, both when Dean and Sam offered Chuck there, I'll kill him, you kill me, just bring everybody back, and Dean says, bring Cass back, Sam does not even jump in to go, and Eileen. And when they're talking to Jack at the end, there's not a peep about, and you did bring back Cass and Eileen, right? Now, if someone Thanos snapped my beloved out of existence and I was talking to God, I would ask, did you bring Larry back before I cared about 8 billion other people I don't know? I mean, they're very important to the people who love them, but I want my loved person back. And I think I would have mentioned that. So I thought that was a very obvious omission. If you're supposed to be so broken up about these people being gone and yet don't even beg the new God to get them back, that was sort of weird. And to Keith's point about endings, I wonder if we're going to get something more like Babylon 5's ending, where John Sheridan got 20 extra years after he defeated the Shadows because he kind of traded away part of his life. But they knew that in that 20 years, he would, the Vorlons would come and take him. And so he has this big meal, to Beth's point, with all of his friends throughout the years. And then he goes off to become one with the Vorlons in his ship. And I can kind of see perhaps an ending where Sam and Dean end up growing old. And now we see old Sam and Dean, they die together. And the next thing we see everybody at Harville's Roadhouse. That would make me incredibly happy. Harville's Roadhouse in heaven. And so, of course, the whole gang is there, even if they have to drop them in, with camera tricks because they couldn't get them to Vancouver. But that's what I'm kind of holding out for, is Harville's in heaven, because we saw that with Ash when he told them they were soulmates. And so I just want whatever happens to them, that they're together, dead or alive, they're together after all this. So that's my plea to the universe. And Jack, if you're listening.
Yeah.
So I have a question, Carol, before we move on.
Sure, we'll have a few comments that I want to highlight too, but go ahead. Yes.
So let's say Jack didn't bring back any of the monsters. Did Jack destroy all the lore? Because witchcraft, which is important to me, is very big in this world. So even if we don't have vampires or werewolves or angels, we would still have witches with hex bags, right? Like the boys could fight those for a long time, couldn't they?
I don't know. I guess we'll find out, because I mean, we really don't know what he did, but except that he said that he had Amara inside of him, and that he was, that this meant that there was going to be balance, that they were, that way. And so that kind of a world does have balance, as long as it doesn't get out of balance and you have people like Sam and Dean to make sure it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
Then that's, who knows? I mean, that it could be. I don't know. I guess we have to wait and find out. But we have
Kristen wants to say something. Oh, sorry. Keep
oh,
going.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, is everybody in agreement then that was not the last episode story-wise? Because I kind of felt that was the last episode story-wise. And this coming week is going to be a wrap on this series. That there really isn't more.
So
Sam
like an
and Dean
episode where they sit
story.
around talking.
I mean,
So like an episode about what it was to make this show and themes. About what it was to make this show
Well, we're
and
supposed to-
themes.
oh.
Yeah, because that
Well,
was
we're
kind of
supposed
just a feeling I got from watching that. That felt like a closing out of the story itself. And then this coming week is a closing for the series and
We're
everybody
supposed to
who worked
go.
on it. So I just was
We're
kind of
supposed to
interested in
go.
getting people's
we're
opinion
supposed
about
to get
that.
like an hour recap that I'm not sure is actually in the show as much as almost a documentary about the show.
Right. Yeah.
And for
Mhm.
the final episode, which is the series finale, which I think is story based.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's some unfinished business, and we've been talking about some of that here in these last several minutes. I think that I'm not sure. And I guess it was your point that you made, Kristen, about you felt as though maybe for the Winchesters, that kind of wrapped up their storyline. But since the whole show is about them, I mean, I get your point, and yet at the same time, I think there's still a little more to come. And in terms of all of the other characters and all of the people we want to see come back, And this one that I had up there briefly from Renita about maybe this week will be a fast forward, given the episode is called Carry On. That's an interesting theory. Who knows? We'll see.
Well, I mean, I'm pretty sure the episode is only
Right,
called
right.
Carry
But
On because of
still,
the
it
song,
makes
but
it a
still.
good metaphor anyway. So, and there have been
Yeah.
some other, comments here that were going on. We had one from, let's see, when Marks first got on. I think for those of you who are big Lucifer fans, that he wants to see this. This is a TV show that Marks might like to see. Hi, Marks. That he's reincarnated on another Earth and decides to team up with a police detective. So there you go, Beth. You can still see more of Lucifer somewhere else. And
I would love to see Mark
Crossover.
Ellison and Mark Pellegrino have a snark off as dueling Lucifer. That would just be awesome.
That would be amazing. I would love to watch that.
And then Melissa's comment was that she'd be glad if we didn't have any Jack this coming week. The story started with our boys, let it end with them as well. And I mean, I get that, and because I understand, there are a lot of people who feel this way. And I think that we kind of did get a good ending for Jack. I mean, for his appearance physically on the show and the way he said goodbye. But do any of you want to speak to this comment here of Melissa's?
Well, I agree with what you just said, Carol, that I think he got the right ending. Yeah, that was the end. Yeah, that he's God now, and he said he was going to be hands off, and I think bringing him back would kind of contravene that. I mean, I don't think he needs to not be in the episode, just because I think it would be awesome if everybody was in the last episode, just because I'm a big fan of things coming full circle. But and especially with a show that's been around this long, I think an acknowledgement of everything that has come before would not be untoward. Although again, the pandemic may have complicated that, but I think there's arguments to be made in both directions.
See, and I'm over Jack so much. This is a 15-year show. I have been invested in Cass for what? How many years? 12, 13, 10? I don't even know. Cass is part of my life. Jack's been around for a season. Wow, let's spend more time on Jack. I really felt like he got so much more play than he deserved as a tertiary character. And I just don't think that as fans, we all adore Jack so much that we want to see more of him than, say, Cass. Because if I have to pick, I'd rather have Cass come back.
I think one of the issues with Jack, though, was kind of how he started out, in terms of the fact that, just the way he was in the beginning. He was not an easy character to like. But it's also, he's got a unique position as a Nephilim. They were not supposed to exist, and so you always got the feeling that he was trying, but yeah, I think that he was harder to warm up to. And the fact is, the poor guy ended up, he was born a teenager. I mean, for God's sake, I mean, show him some mercy. That's a hard time, but I don't know. I mean, that's just kind of my feeling. I thought it was kind of an appropriate ending for his character because of that. I wouldn't be upset to see him again.
Calvert did a terrific job with. I thought Alex Calvert did a terrific job with the character, and
I agree. Yeah.
I still think that Jack was inserted into the storyline because the CW's demographic is 18 to 34 and they wanted a teenager. And I, at this point in my life, really have to push back on anybody thinking 37 to 41 is old, especially when you look that fine. I'm sorry, just not feeling it. I'm kind of tired of teenagers saving the world. Could we please have a grown-up here? But I think also what a lot of fans were afraid was that Jack would end up stealing the thunder that really belonged to Sam and Dean. It's been their 15-year journey, and then this new character saved the day, and Sam and Dean not, and kind of show them up. is sort of disrespectful to the history of the show. And I think they managed to pull it off. If you're going to go up against, you need some kind of superpower. And
Right,
if you're
right.
not going to blow up one of the boys with extra souls or whatever, then you need an Nephilim. And Sam and Dean figured into it prominently enough that I personally didn't feel like they were done out of their ending. But I know that was the fear that a lot of people had.
Yeah, and I agree with that because, but what it felt like to me in this episode was that with Jack taking on the powers, that's that they figured out he could do it.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a plan that all three of them put together. If it hadn't been for all three of them, it wouldn't have happened.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, he couldn't have pulled it off. I mean, he would have had a harder time taking Chuck down, because what they said was that he was expending some of his own energy, the Chuck was, by all the pummeling of Dean and Sam that was so unsettling to watch. And yet at the same time, you figure it was for a good cause, right? Though at that point we didn't know exactly what was going on yet. But I mean, I understand your point, Gail, and I know a lot of other people feel that way, but I think that they did handle it in such a way that it made sense.
No, I do too.
ultimately.
I was just saying that had been a fear going into this, and I think they
Oh, yeah.
did as best they could.
Right. And I really hadn't thought about it in terms of the demographic, but,
Jack was very obviously, a CW directed addition to the show because, hey, they're getting too freaking old, which is nonsense, but that's the CW for you.
Well, I wonder, it'll be interesting to see once things are over and they're no longer under contract with the CW. It'll be curious to hear what anybody associated with the show has to say about that. I mean, if it's addressed, if somebody might get asked that. So what was with the addition of Jack?
All you have to do is look at the other shows they produce. I mean, even the ones that have older leads, like Black Lightning. Like with Black Lightning, they basically created 2 teenage daughters for him for the express purpose of having teenagers on the show, because that's what the CW does.
Look at it was going to be Jody and Donna and 4 teenage girls.
Right.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, but at least we would have had women on the show. Didn't die in 30 minutes.
Yeah.
Well, my theory about Wayward Daughters has always been that the reason it didn't get picked up at the time was because the show was still on.
Uh-huh.
And I think that's always been my feeling about it, is that they probably would have a lot of pushback from people who weren't ready to accept it, that the Wayward Daughters, who were doing essentially the same thing as the guys. But I think that if they ever decide to resurrect that they would have a much better chance of getting it picked up at that point.
I don't see why that would be a problem. It's not like, they were perfectly willing to put The Flash and Legends of Tomorrow and Supergirl and the upcoming and Black Lightning and the upcoming Superman show all on at the same time as Arrow is, and they're all doing the same thing too.
But that's a much bigger universe than what we're talking about. I mean, that's just my own personal feeling.
Yeah.
I had when it didn't get picked up, that was what I thought. I thought, well, maybe this is not forever and they will, eventually show up. So
we can only hope, just because Jody and Donna are awesome and I want more of them, damn it.
Oh, I agree. I absolutely agree. They're amazing. And I've mentioned before in some of these panels that it could have been at the one that we did for DragonCon, for the season 15 up till, the first 13 episodes, that I have literally made notes in this notebook that when things seemed dire in the past for either Donna or Jody, it was like I'd make a note to myself, they better not do anything to Donna. They better not, Jody must still be alive at the end of this. So, hopefully that will be the case. And before I forget, I do want to let our viewers know that we will be discussing the finale, but we will be doing not Monday night, but Sunday afternoon. and that will be posted in on the Facebook page and on Twitter. And just, as a reminder for people, but I want, if people end up watching this later and so that they can hear that announcement, we will do that discussion a day earlier. And we hope that we will have some folks there, but I think we are getting close to out of time here. Kristen, did you have something you wanted to say?
Yeah, just one last thing. Referring back to Keith's full circle comment, is I don't know how many people picked it up, but when the boys pulled into that gas station, that was the Buzz and Todd Route 66 diner. And that kind of goes back to the original TV show with two traveling guys in a classic car going around the country solving different issues of the week. So I really appreciate that little nod. I saw that and I was like, oh my God, they mentioned Route 66 in the episode. That was a great reference. That was it. That's all I had.
Well, thank you. And yeah, there was another throwback scene that I really liked, was just the fact that when Sam and Jack were in the bunker doing research, and it just reminded me of the old days when they, when that was really what they got to do. And interestingly, you see Dean a lot using the books, whereas Sam has gotten very proficient with his computer. Although I think in the past season there was a joke about Dean saying something about, or some reference to thinking that, what do you do with it besides you look up porn, I don't know, or something like that. But that I vaguely remember something to that effect. But in any case, I want to thank everyone for being here tonight, whether you are one of our viewers. I want to thank my panelists. And, we've got one more that we'll be doing next week. And then I also will be announcing some other, in that video, I will announce some other things we have coming up, supernatural related and otherwise. And I hope that will make everyone happy. But again, thank you to anyone who watches this with us and interacts with us. We appreciate you very much. Thank you to anyone who watches it later. And thanks to all of my wonderful panelists who give up their time every week to come and do this. And I appreciate it so much. Thanks, you guys. And we'll see you on Sunday next week.
And thanks to you.
Good night.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Carol.
Thank
Night.
you.